In today's video, we are deep diving into the tropics as we obviously have our fourth tropical depression in the Atlantic Ocean that is expected to become Tropical Storm Debbie, even possibly Hurricane Debbie, as there is some hurricane watches along the western Florida coast, kind of near the Big Bend, especially there at Florida. We will look at that later on. We're currently looking at some satellite imagery. I want to remind all of you that we are going to be going over the entire lower 48's weather forecast here, so even if you don't live in these areas that expect some tropical impacts, first off, don't be too sure because this one is expected to bring some impacts pretty far inland. However, we will be going over just the entire pattern. And on top of that, we'll also be looking at just the tropics overall. So not just this system, but also the systems to come. We do have a couple of areas of interest across the Atlantic that we're going to be taking a look at today. I'm thinking this might be one of the longest direct weather videos of all time, but maybe not. We'll see how quickly we move through it. One note that I want to make about this tropical depression is look at how slow it's moving, if at all. I mean, some of these clouds, especially up here, just look like they're just sitting there. I don't see much movement. I mean, we even see the swirl in kind of our lower clouds here. We see the swirl. However, in a lot of your higher up clouds, the reds, the blacks, I mean, they're just kind of just sitting there. They're really sitting there. Even some backwards movement in some of these up to the northeast. So very interesting. And even your main area of development here south of Cuba, this is just staying very, very stagnant. And the reason I bring this up is it's going to help with two things. For this storm's sake, it's really not going to be helpful overall for impacts because we could see some further development because it's just sitting over the warmer waters. So that's kind of your red flag number one here. It's not really moving, so if it gets over some favorable areas, it's going to be there for quite a while. Not only that, as it's dropping torrential rainfall, this isn't a storm that's moving in and moving out, it's just sitting there. So you could see hours and hours and hours of the heaviest rainfall, maybe even days in some spots, and that's why we're expecting some historic potential rainfall from this one. As we've kind of been talking about for days now, 10 inches plus of rainfall is on the cards, but for sure 5 to 10 inches in specific locations seems to be a likelihood, and that is just torrential rainfall and is going to bring the threat of flooding, of course. With all that being said, let's just go ahead and move on to some of our model guidance, and this is where we're going to kind of mix just the overall United States forecast with the tropical depression. So there's going to be two components to this video, of course. We do see that by just this afternoon, a lot of people are expecting this one to be a tropical storm already by this late evening. So we see it's well on its way north of Cuba by this afternoon, which honestly, looking at the current satellite data, I'm wondering if it might take a little bit longer than that, but we'll see. Of course, this is going to be by about 3 p.m. I'm recording this at about 12 p.m., that satellite imagery being from about right now. So this is a stalling out storm, and I'm curious to see how long it takes to trek northward, if at all, comparatively to what the models are showing. Once it gets north of Cuba, this is its main opportunity for development, of course, because it is over these open eastern Gulf of Mexico waters that are very warm and very favorable. So most of the development that this storm is going to do will be over this area. Between its kind of trip to Cuba and then trip to Florida here is really where that majority of development is going to happen. So this is going to determine a lot here about what this storm will do. Now, we saw it on the satellite imagery, of course, but seeing it now also on the model guidance, there is some pretty widespread storminess because of this smaller storm, and this is above average space that this storm is impacting, I would say, especially as just a tropical storm verging on tropical depression verging on tropical storm. I would say this is a very large, broad area being impacted by this system. On top of this system being over place for the southeast, we do see a pretty minor low up here. There's a more major one over the Hudson Bay, so overall broad low pressure across eastern Canada, and this does bring a stretching cold front here to the eastern states, and this storm can be expected to kind of hang around where that frontal boundary is located. So that is kind of the main thing that we expect. For the day today, we can expect thunderstorms up and down the east coast, though, because of that cold front. Let's just take this towards Sunday on August 4th. I almost wanted to say October 4th. I have to wait, only 2 months. I only have to wait 2 months until it's October. That's unbelievable to me. I feel like this year has just flown by, but I also feel like I say that every year. I also feel like it gets worse every year, though. So, yeah. We do see that our tropical system by tomorrow afternoon will have moved maybe, I don't know, 50 miles northward. I feel like it's moving slower than this in current time than what the models are calling for. So I have this gut feeling that the models are going to really continue to slow down the track of what they're expecting for this one, just based on current trajectories. Should speed up later on eventually as it reaches that cold front, although it's just looking to be a slow burner regardless. It's a stronger storm by this point, probably a tropical storm by tomorrow afternoon on Sunday, August 4th, I'd say. Here, still kind of near that Florida coast, but it's over open waters enough to where it's not really getting impacted by this land, probably. It's more being influenced by just being over the open water, so this should still be some time for development for this system. 1004, still a weaker low-pressure system, certainly looking likely that it's a tropical storm by this point, but probably not really approaching hurricane status unless things go differently than what this current model is showing. We see again some pretty bad thunderstorms along the eastern coast here, even outside of Debbie. We do see that there is a lot of thunderstorm and shower activity here along that Rocky Mountain range. We've also kind of been talking about that for a few days. It's probably slid under the radar, no pun intended, a little bit there, just because we've been talking about this more major tropical system, of course. Now, as we go ahead and move this towards Monday afternoon here on August 5th, what we see is that this storm will have kind of struck there along that big bend of Florida. Still 1004 here between southern Georgia and northern Florida there. It is pretty far inland, but we're still seeing pretty widespread impacts from this system. Look at how wide the area is. We could be seeing some impacts in Mississippi, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and as far northward as North Carolina or even southern Virginia already by Monday. So the bands from this system are just stretching really, really far, and that is going to bring a wider range of impacts, both in space, but also in variety. It should be interesting, to say the least. For the Rockies and Four Corner states, we continue to see some of these showers, and then for the northern states along the northern plains, upper Midwest, Great Lakes, and Northeast, we are seeing some pockets of showers and thunderstorms, as there is a little bit of a cold front or a stationary front there over these northern areas where there is some cooler air trying to dip southward, but the warmth is kind of making a good push northward as well, so we'll see how that progresses. Obviously, with a tropical system thrown in the mix, things can get very hairy. Tuesday, August 6th, we see that cold front makes a little progression, especially the further east you go, so it should be cooler for the upper Midwest and Great Lakes, as well as the Northeast by Tuesday. Daily emojis right there. We can see that we do have a stronger tropical system off the southeast, so the European model does show a lot of development here once it reaches east off of Florida, off of Georgia, and off of South Carolina, down to a 998, I think that is, so about 6 millibars stronger than it was at one point here just recently, so it will be quite a bit stronger by this point according to this model, and still bringing a pretty wide area of impacts. We can see bands reaching into the Gulf of Mexico still, impacting the Florida Keys, all of Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia here. So definitely a very widespread storm here, as you can see. We also have a pocket of storminess moving southward through the Northeast that is going to kind of meet up with it, and that should make things even more interesting than they already are. Wednesday the 7th, we can tell it is really just stalling out, not really moving too much whatsoever, down to a 986 here. So this particular model, the European model run from last night, this is the 0Z run. 12Z run is not out yet, by the way, so that is why we're using the 0Z run from last night. 986, I mean, that could be approaching hurricane status off the southeast, which, you know, we talk about how favorable these eastern Gulf of Mexico waters are. The southeast waters are also very warm this year, so very favorable. Historically always is, but it's extra favorable this year. We see pretty major impacts here for Virginia down through North Carolina, South Carolina, and still Georgia here from this system. Even the Bahamas and Florida still getting some bands from this tropical system. Very impactful. And again, heavier bands still sitting along the coast because the low is so close to the coast there. And they're just sitting. It's so stagnant and so slow that you're looking at 12 to 24, maybe more hours of rainfall from this system. That's just going to exponentially increase the flooding risk here with this system. By Thursday, on August 8th, we see it kind of do a curvature back. I'm going to just update us on kind of what we're seeing as far as the track here. It kind of just curves back into central South Carolina, impacting Charleston, South Carolina quite heavily if this is the case, as a 9 I think that's an 86 still. So 986 millibar low pressure center. Probably somewhere between a tropical storm and hurricane if the storm looks exactly how that model's calling for. That's the one caveat, and that's obviously not always the case. That's an understatement. But we're going to look at other models today as well, of course. Still bringing very wide areas of impacts, but we are seeing quite an intense banding effect happening here along areas in eastern Georgia, South Carolina, and southern North Carolina there. We will look at the wind swath in a little bit as well, just to really get a good idea of the potential impacts. By Friday afternoon, it kind of moves inland. Still a 999, bringing very heavy rainfall and moving quite slowly. So this is just going to increase the areas seeing potential flooding from this system. We're seeing continued heavy rainfall, obviously, and now it's stretching up towards New England even. Because of that storm system that moved southward, while this storm is moving northward, they're all kind of interacting, and it's bringing a broader area of storminess where we're even looking at potential flooding for the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast from this thing. Definitely a wide area of impacts and a wide time range. We're going to be dealing with this storm for a while. This is already Saturday the 10th. So this is a week from today. It's still located over North Carolina, so it hasn't moved that far northward in a week, nearly as far as you would expect. We still see just very heavy rainfall sitting over South Carolina here. North Carolina, Virginia, especially there, West Virginia, Maryland, D.C., the Delmarva, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, even southern New York, Connecticut, and Rhode Island here, seeing pretty heavy rainfall from this system. I will mention we have some very far western plains storms here, potentially some severe weather, thunderstorms, or even just showers here just to the east of the Rockies. That's why I'm calling it kind of the western plains for a lot of these areas like Montana, Alberta, areas like that. As we keep going, I want to take us towards Sunday the 11th. We see it moves back off the East Coast here and develops back into a 990 millibar low pressure center. So redeveloping quite a bit, bringing some impacts to southern New England and areas of the Mid-Atlantic. Let's see what it does here. And it does move back towards Canada, eventually coming to an end. Now for Monday afternoon, this will be our final day on August 12th. We do see some pretty heavy thunderstorms here for some of the northern plains and upper Midwest. And then also for the southeast, we're seeing some of your typical summertime thunderstorms. Let's take a look at the GFS. I want to see what this one does with our system in comparison to the European model. And we do see it developing much further off that west coast of Florida here. We see 1003 by tomorrow morning at 2 a.m. So just tonight, basically. 994 by tomorrow afternoon on Sunday, August 4th. So this is kind of more in terms of the intensity looking somewhere between a tropical storm and a hurricane. This seems to be a lot more in line with what the National Hurricane Center is going with, which makes sense. The GFS has basically been right for almost the entirety of this storm. The European model has been very far off. So take that as you will. It doesn't mean that the GFS model is going to continue being correct and the European model can't be correct now. They definitely can do a little flip now at this point halfway through the storm, but the GFS model has proven to be the more dependable model thus far through this storm. We see it impacts the Big Bend, again, just in southern Georgia, northern North Carolina. I mean, that low is hanging out right on the border. Again, bringing heavy impacts, moving very slowly. It moves off the southeast, starts to develop really quickly down to a 987, 985, 978 now by that point, 975 by Wednesday afternoon. And it got as low there as a 974 very early on Thursday or very late on Wednesday, probably 11 p.m. on Wednesday the 7th there. Before this one wants to show it right in between Georgia and South Carolina, so a little further south with the landfall there. But this one is even more likely to be a hurricane at landfall there off the southeast than the European model. Very, very impactful system. And then look at the flooding we get day after day after day. This is by Saturday the 10th here. We see it over North Carolina, bringing flooding to South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia. I'm going to move to the entire eastern view because look at this. Look at this. All the way up the northeast, look at the heavy rainfall we get. Here's Friday the 9th, Saturday the 10th, Sunday the 11th. And this one slides it up the east coast, impacting the mid-Atlantic coast and the southern New England coast a lot more there. Just out of curiosity, let me look at the total precipitation here. Absolutely destroys the East Coast here. 2 to 5 inches in the reds, which is for the entire East Coast from southern Florida to almost northern Maine. It does turn a little bit blue there at the end. We see browns for Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, areas of the mid-Atlantic as well there, as you can see, even southern New England. And that's going to be 5 to 10 inches of precipitation. So we're looking at severe flooding being possible for a lot of the eastern states here. We do see the blues there for Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. That is 10 to 15 inches of precipitation. And this particular GFS model shows 15 to 20 inches there in the magentas for Georgia and South Carolina. Somewhere in there seeing a total of 32.69 inches, apparently, is the maximum we're seeing somewhere. I want to see if I can get a state view here and we can get a little bit of a closer look. Yeah, look at some of these amounts for coastal Georgia and South Carolina. We're looking at 21.59, 19.06, 22.08, 21, 23, 21, 16. So you're looking at 10 to 15 inches for Charleston, South Carolina here on this model. Savannah, Georgia, looking at quite a bit in here as well. So the entire coastline here of Georgia and South Carolina getting hammered with 10 inches plus, upwards of 20 inches on this GFS model. Take it with a grain of salt. That's historic flooding, obviously. However, that just shows you what is possible with a storm like this. Now, kind of just to backtrack into the overall tropics, I want to take a look here at the satellite imagery across the Atlantic, because we do have, obviously, our tropical system here near Cuba and Florida. Very broad impacts against slow mover. But we do have other areas of interest. One here to the east of your Eastern Caribbean. We do see another here in our MDR, short for Main Development Region here, just to the west of that one. And then we have another wave moving off of Africa behind it. So we see we're dealing with wave number 1 right now, but there is wave number 2, 3, 4 as well, already down the pipeline. So this is quite common this time of year. I'd say this looks rather intense, obviously. The interesting thing to note is I think that the pattern could be conductive for some out-to-sea systems, so we could get a lot of curvature here, hopefully, with some of these, is kind of my current thinking. But don't be surprised if one of the 2, 3, or 4 here do break into the Southern Caribbean and get interesting, or maybe hover a little bit closer to the East Coast. That is going to be on the cards, and if not for these systems, we're going to have many, many more throughout the month of August and September, obviously. So I want to make you aware that this is not all that we have to talk about. There is other systems already out there that could potentially develop that we are watching very closely. Now, your European AI model, interestingly enough, we see 1, 2, 3, 4. So we do see these systems. I want to show you kind of what we see here. One of which, number 2, actually does move into the Southern Caribbean here. Very interesting. The track that we see here is very similar to the European and GFS model, so feel free to pay attention to this very closely. We're going to kind of glance at it, but it's not the biggest deal in the world right now. We do see that there is our second system behind this one right here. We'll watch what happens with that one as well. So we get another one into the Southern Caribbean, and then here's an out-to-sea solution. So this is kind of what I was talking about. This one kind of wants to move up like that. So we see a lot of interesting paths with some of these. The interesting thing is if you watch these two areas here, they do move into the Southern Caribbean, and they do kind of want to move into this western Gulf of Mexico area, one of which fizzles out, but the second one looks to kind of impact somewhere in the deeper south here. We obviously get a pretty broad depiction here from this European AI model. However, we do get a path something like this overall, which would just not be a good one. That could lead to a lot of different things. Also note that we continue to get more and more systems moving into this MDR area. One pretty decent one there at the end towards August 18th right here. And we get yet another here moving off of Africa. So again, more in the pipeline, more happening down the road. I want to continue to keep you guys up to date with the overall tropics as well. Here's the total precipitation on the European model. We're going to zoom into the east here, obviously, in a second. We do see heavier precipitation than normal, I would say, for a lot of your northern plains and upper Midwest here. Everywhere else is pretty much below average unless you're in the east, which we're going to take a look at now. Now, the scary thing is that we get a lot of agreement here with the GFS model. We get a little bit less here for New England, but from the mid-Atlantic southward to Florida, we are seeing over 2 inches, so 2 to 5 in the reds. Browns we're seeing as far northward as Pennsylvania, southern New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts there. Again, that's 5 to 10 inches in those brown shades, which we're seeing up and down the southeast and mid-Atlantic coast, even into New England. Blues, we're seeing for quite a bit of Virginia, Maryland, the Delmarva here. We're seeing North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, obviously. And again, the blues is 10 to 15 inches of precipitation, a whole lot. And we're even seeing the magentas once again. We're going to zoom into Georgia. That was a good view, I think, right here. This model agrees with the GFS model on 15 to 20 plus inches of rainfall between Georgia and South Carolina here. Look at this. 19.97, almost 20 inches there. 18, 26, 24, 19, 19, 16, 16, 16. Imagine 15 to 25 inches of precipitation. That is what we have two of the most reliable models in the world calling for areas of eastern Georgia and eastern South Carolina over just a few days. This is probably the most precipitation I've seen depicted since Hurricane Harvey. Not to say that it's going to be anywhere near that. However, this is the type of graphics that we were seeing at times. Sometimes obviously way worse than this. But this is definitely the most that I feel like I've seen since then. Not that it's as much or more. It's just we haven't seen that since then. Very, very concerning, obviously. As we take a look at the precipitation anomalies, no surprise that we're expecting just extremely far above average amounts here for the entire eastern seaboard, in the blues especially, but the bright blues is 5 inches or more above average. We're seeing a maximum here of 10 inches above average, probably for Georgia, South Carolina area. Very, very scary stuff. Now, as we take a look here at the spaghetti model guidance, we do see that versus yesterday, we're kind of seeing a lot more of a kind of curve here. Very slow moving. Notice how close together these hour markers are. That's single day markers. So here's the current location somewhere in here. This is 1 day from now, 24 hours. Here's 2 days from now, 3 days from now, 4 days from now, and then it all just gets jumbled up in here. Look at that. I mean, this is days that this storm is sticking around. I see hours 120 there right here. So this is days 5. Here's day 3. Here's day 5. So right here is 2 days of movement. So definitely a very slow mover. Does look like it wants to kind of head back towards the East Coast after that curve. So it's kind of making a little M here. And it potentially wants to move off this coastline again, which could bring further impacts down the road as well. Something we're watching for very closely, of course. Also, just we're watching for areas in here. As it gets close to the coast, it could start to redevelop into a little bit of a stronger storm over here, particularly where I live. So I'm going to be watching that very closely. Now, here is your European Ensemble models spaghetti model forecast. So this is taking each member and making its own spaghetti model plot. And we see something very similar. We're seeing something like this with the overall consensus. We see a lot of stalling out in this area, similarly to the other models. We do have some showing it kind of continue up the coast, and these are some of the strongest outlooks here, where we reach into the 970s, 960s here with some of those orange ones on the coast. You can see a lot of the ones that stay closer or on the coast stay in the greens or the blues, which is going to be likely 980s, 990s as far as millibars. So indicating a weaker storm over land, stronger storm over water. Really goes without saying. Didn't even need to really mention that. That's kind of doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out. Here's the GFS Ensemble model forecast. We can see it's very similar, except we get almost a full loop here, which would just stall out the forecast even more. Again, GFS model's been a little bit more reliable. I would say we get even further stalled out here. We even get some further development in some of these models, again in the oranges. So very, very bad look. Here's the intensity guidance, and many of these models are still indicating, well, actually, that's the 12Z forecast from yesterday. Let me refresh this. Okay, here we go. No, it's still the 12Z from yesterday. Oh, okay, so we need to do this. Here we go. Here is the guidance from today. They switch it from Invest to Tropical Depression 4, so I was still looking at the Invest page. That's the problem. We see that we're very close to tropical storm status right now. Many of these models show us hitting tropical storm status. Obviously, there's about 2 or 3 here that don't show it. But the rest really surge us well into tropical storm status, even some approaching that hurricane status here, again, before striking Florida. So we get a couple here wanting to flirt with that idea. We see it drop in intensity, obviously, once it's over Florida. but then it moves back over open water and starts to intensify again, where we do get one model showing us back into hurricane status off the southeast coast. Very shocked that this is the only model showing this when we had so many others calling for such an intense storm, really getting to its lowest pressure off that east coast. Regardless, we're pretty much hovering between hurricane and tropical storm status for the entirety of this storm's impacts over the next week or more. So very, very interesting stuff. We're going to be watching this storm really, really closely, obviously. Here is the National Hurricane Center's cone forecast. And as you can see, we are expected to remain at tropical depression status through kind of the day today. But by 8 a.m. tomorrow, on Sunday, we are expected to be at tropical storm status. Before striking the Big Bend of Florida there, we can kind of see their expected path. Again, these are 12-hour markers, so look at how they slow down even further than it is right now over here, really stalling out. Interestingly, I want to mention this. We have tropical storm watches there for some of the Florida Keys. I think this is maybe Key West. I don't know what this island is really, this blue one, but we do have a tropical storm warning there at the very end of that strip of islands. Most of that west coast of Florida does have a tropical storm warning in the blue, but that pink is a hurricane watch for the Big Bend. So honestly, the National Hurricane Center here is acknowledging the possibility of development to hurricane status here between now and 8 a.m. on Monday when it strikes that Big Bend of Florida. We do see that it does move up into Georgia, off the coast again, and then back onshore to South Carolina, really not heading as far offshore here as a lot of your models are calling for. Still expecting huge totals of rainfall. Here's the current guidance from the National Hurricane Center outlook, a little bit less than the models. Obviously, they like to play it very, very conservative, but look at the totals on the right-hand side of your screen. 1 to 2 in the light green, 2 to 4 in the dark green, 4 to 6 in the yellow, 6 to 8 here in the lightest orange. Your darker orange is going to be 8 to 12 inches of precipitation, so already pushing at potentially a foot for some of the Tampa Bay area, and then for a lot of coastal Georgia, South Carolina, and even southern North Carolina there. We even get the reds just offshore of South Carolina, where they're looking at potentially 12 to 16 inches of precipitation that could come on shore with the outlooks, and that would obviously be very close to what these models have been outputting. So this is the National Hurricane Center's official rainfall forecast, and they are acknowledging these historic potential totals here. All of these things are very concerning. Of course, we're going to continue to keep you guys up to date with everything regarding this current tropical system, future tropical systems, the overall forecast around the nation. So be sure to subscribe. We do upload every single day. You can even hit the bell icon for daily notifications when we upload so you never miss one. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy it. Leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.